watching Reason and Theology Live. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
And we're back. Welcome to Reason and Theology. Your host, Michael, on Tuesday. How am I coming through? Y'all let me know in the chat. Am I coming through clearly? I rearranged some stuff, not on camera, but everything in the surrounding area. So I had to detach most of the cables and equipment and making sure everything is still working properly. So I think we're good, but let me know in the chat if y'all are not able to hear me. I don't want to end up doing a whole show with y'all being able to hear me, kind of like we did one time. Where I realized 30 minutes into the show that nobody has heard a word that I've said. That was fun. Okay, everybody's saying we hear you loudly and clearly. Okay. Well, yeah, I'm a liberal, evidently, or a modernist. I guess they're the same thing in some people's minds, although they're not the same thing technically. But they are related for sure. But be that as it may, I'm a liberal modernist, according to some. And that's what we're going to go over. Some comments by an individual. Not going to name who they are. Not sure who they are anyway. They're just a random person who is commenting on one of the Telegram groups that I'm in about me. Instead of talking to me about my views, they were just commenting on me. And somebody tagged me in the Telegram group, and I really got a kick out of reading their comments about me. So it was really this will be more. This is not me literally actually engaging the arguments. Not going to do that in this show. I'm more going to just kind of go over some of the claims about me, give me my first impression, or I guess second impression at this point. I'm not really going to try to literally engage a random on Telegram. Mr. Lofton, founder of Reason and Theology. I do not want to be judgmental or rude, but his theological opinions are, from my perspective, too liberal. Yeah, so there you go. There's the liberal charge. I'm a liberal. And later on, of course, I'm called a modernist. That's interesting. Liberal. I am of the perspective, or I guess that's a way of putting it. I assent to everything that the Catholic magisterium proposes. I assent to those propositions with the proper level of assent owed. So those things that are dogmatic and are defined by the church, I give divine and Catholic faith. Those things that are definitively taught as secondary objects, I give the proper assent owed to that as well, which is that you maintain the proposition to be held definitively. I give that. Anything that's taught by the authentic magisterium that's non-definitive, you give religious submission of intellect and will to it. I give that as well. So I'm not sure how one could categorize me as liberal in light of that. Even when it comes to disciplinary matters, I give obedience to disciplinary decisions made by members of the magisterium. So I don't know how that could be liberal. The only way that I think one could end up being liberal is by failing to do that, right? By failing to not give the proper assent owed, and by saying the church is wrong on this particular matter, and it's wrong to expect assent on this or that doctrine. Not so much discipline, but especially doctrine. Although some could argue on discipline as well, that might make somebody a liberal if they dissent from certain disciplines. I can maybe see that, but that's not the case. I don't do that, so I don't know where this idea of liberal comes from, other than what liberal tends to mean these days, or a modernist even, is you maintain something that I don't agree with. And I have a very low informed opinion about the theological matter, a very poorly informed opinion. But since you disagree with my poorly informed opinion, you're a liberal, you're a modernist. That's what liberal means today for a lot of people. That was the first message. I got a kick out of that one. And that's when they tagged me. They said, well, hey, if you have a dispute with Michael, why don't you talk to him directly? So they tagged me in the Telegram, and I started reading it, and he says this. He thinks that Pope can sing. I think he's from Croatia, so English, I guess, would be his second language. So that's why you're kind of seeing the way he phrases it. He's doing his best to speak in English. He thinks that Pope can single-handedly alter tradition, including liturgy. He does not see problem with communion on hand. He was discussing Timothy Flanders on this topic. Sorry for my English. Well, we'll definitely excuse the English. But wow, where do we begin with this? Single-handedly can alter tradition. I thought I was the guy who spent an entire hour parsing out the different distinctions on tradition, the different kinds of tradition, and the ones that we can say are irreformable, and the ones that we can say the church can reform. Not me as an individual. You'll note I'm saying the church can reform certain traditions. The church, not me, the church. And I said certain traditions, not all. Obviously, sacred tradition is not going to be eligible there. I mean, there's at least over 11 different kinds of tradition, a way in which we can use the term tradition, that I went over in the video. And I go over the kinds that are irreformable and the kinds that the church can reform. So I thought I was that guy, but somehow I take the position that the Pope can single-handedly, by the way, did you hear that? Single-handedly alter tradition. No distinctions on the different kinds of tradition. I got a kick out of that. But the Pope can single-handedly alter. When did I say the Pope could just single-handedly? I mean, can the Pope individually, as the shepherd of the universal church, reform some disciplinary traditions? Could he? Well, Trent says yes. Vatican I says yes, and appends an anathema for those who say otherwise. Let me point that out. And by the way, you would be a liberal for going against something that is taught definitively. Just throwing that one out there. The irony here. But should he is a different question, right? Should he reform some of these things single-handedly? Probably not. I don't think he should. Can he reform some of these disciplinary traditions without the consent of the bishops? He can, and that's actually a good thing that he can. It's a good thing. But in the vast majority of cases, he should not exercise that authority. But it's good that he has that authority. Because what if you have a really bunch of bad bishops in the world? You do need that power. But it shouldn't be used arbitrarily. Another way of looking at it is, could an ecumenical council single-handedly alter disciplinary traditions? Well, according to the magisterium itself, it can, but should it? Should it? In most cases, probably not. But you do want an ecumenical council to have that power. You definitely want that. Um, so okay, he thinks that a pope can single-handedly alter tradition. Again, no distinctions, no caveats, including liturgy. So I guess in some people's minds, the liturgy is just irreformable in all of its aspects. So it just came down from heaven, the Tridentine liturgy. It just came down from heaven as is. Kind of like those who say the King James version of the Bible came down from heaven, or Paul used it, or Jesus said thee and thou, not you. Therefore, you should use the King James. I've heard these arguments before. So there have been no changes to the liturgy. Again, not even making any distinctions between the Roman rite or the Byzantine rite or something like that, but just period, that he can alter the liturgy. I'm sorry, I hate to break it to you, but popes have done that before, and we're not just talking about the pre-conciliar. I'm sorry, post-conciliar era. But again, does that mean in some people's minds that the liturgy is entirely irreformable? Now, obviously, there's some aspects to the liturgy that cannot be reformed. I don't think a pope has any authority to say we can use Doritos now instead of bread, right? For the matter of the Eucharist. I don't think any pope can say that. Because Jesus himself determined the matter of this sacrament, so that can't be modified. But okay, could the Pope add the Our Father to the liturgy? Could he? I mean, because there was a time in which the Our Father wasn't used in the Roman Rite. Y'all do know that, right? So could he add it? He could. Sure. There have definitely been some additions to the Roman Rite. There's also been a lot of subtractions to the Roman Rite. I mean, Gregory the Great took a whole lot out of the Roman canon. Does that mean that he was just destroying sacred tradition when he did this? Again, this is why I talk about distinctions, nuance, distinctions. This is why I do shows, hour-long shows on the different kinds of tradition, hour-long shows on the different kinds of reforms that a pope or an ecumenical council can make. This is why, because if you don't have these distinctions, you're going to come to incredibly terrible positions. I see a super chat here from River Run. Let me see. Silly, it never happens in practice that the Pope single-handedly makes big disciplinary decisions. He's operating with advisors and appointed men. Yeah, right. I mean, but technically, could he? Without the advice of somebody else? He could, in some cases, reform certain things single-handedly. He could. I mean, that's Trent and Vatican I. Take it up with them. If you're not a Catholic, maybe you can dispute that. But if you're a Catholic, you can't dispute that. Should he is a different question, right? Should he? But can he? Power, potential. You can. He does not see problem with communion on the hand. That's interesting because I've done shows talking about how I see problems with in the Roman Rite the way communion on the hand is done. That's interesting. I've also done shows talking about how I think in the Roman Rite, communion should be administered on the tongue, not on the hand. What I was saying, however, in my discussion with Flanders and others, is that intrinsically communion on the hand is not wrong. Intrinsically, it's not evil. I mean, when the Sixth Ecumenical Council at Trullo says that you could only have communion on the hand and can't use any kind of instruments, no golden utensils or nothing like that. You have to use communion on the hand. Now, we could talk about how authoritative that is for the Roman Rite. I understand. We could have that discussion. But again, when an ecumenical council adopts a discipline that communion on the hand should be done and any other form is sacrilege, effectively, were they going against, the deposit of faith? Or I mean, you might say, okay, that discipline needed some reform, right? Okay, all right, but you recognize it's a discipline, though, right? You're not asserting that this is dogmatic. Okay, so communion on gold is my favorite. Patrick says they forbade that. No golden utensils, none of that. You want to know what their argument was? Their argument was, your hands are created by God. These golden utensils are not. Your hands are more worthy to receive communion than these golden utensils, because God made your hands. Now, God made gold too, but we shaped it into these utensils is kind of the idea, right? Now, again, you might push back and say, well, I think that discipline needs to be reformed. Okay. I mean, obviously it was reformed in the East with the liturgical spoon. And it was definitely reformed in the West to the extent that canon was ever even accepted anyway. Is it canon 102? I forget. I'd have to go back and look. But the point is, this discipline, this constant discipline in the first millennium of communion on the hand, are you going to condemn the apostolic fathers for communion on the hand? If it's intrinsically evil, you have to. So no, I'm saying it's not intrinsically evil, but that also doesn't mean that it's the best method today, right? I mean, that method might be acceptable in some parts of the early church, communion on the hand. I don't think it's acceptable in the way it's being done today and in the context we're in today with the Roman Rite. So I don't think that it is the preferred method. Just because it's old doesn't make it good for our day and age. But at the same time, I don't want to say that it's always wrong and intrinsically evil, because that would be to condemn the apostles and Jesus and others. Right? So that's what I was saying. But that somehow gets translated by people who can't make distinctions, as he sees no problem with communion on the hand. This is the problem with putting out some of this content on YouTube. With you end up having people who are eavesdropping, who are not prepared for these conversations, and they just completely misunderstand everything. They're not properly equipped to handle the conversation in an informed way, and so they come to just very radical conclusions. So I got a kick out of that one. Let's see. Liturgy can be altered, but not the perennial teaching of the church, which no pope has altered. And I think actually that was by somebody responding to him. So, in fact, I think I talked to them earlier and got where they're coming from. So no, let me table that one, because I think I know where they're coming from. This is one. No, in his video, he said it is basically no problem. I said that communion was no problem. Communion in the hand was no problem. When did I? I wonder if we could get a timestamp for that, because that does it. I think in a much more nuanced way than just to say communion in the hand is no problem. Unless I say communion in the hand intrinsically is not a problem, but I would have added that distinction. I don't think that I said that just in general it's no problem, because I do think that it is a problem in the Roman Rite in the way in which it's done. It's no problem, but also not ideal situation. So I said that communion in the hand is not the ideal. I don't think I said that either, because that also wouldn't reflect my position. I think that in certain situations, in some contexts, communion in the hand done properly may have been the ideal at that time and in that culture. He even cites Jungmann, but there are many liturgists with different opinions. I always hear this, right? I always hear that. And when you ask them, can you give me some examples? No, they can't actually back it up. But But that wasn't my purpose for really citing it. I wasn't citing him to back up my perspective on communion in the hand. I was citing Jungmann because he gives you the primary sources that shows that this was the predominant mode of reception of communion in the first millennium. He gives you the primary sources. He's not a secondary source here. He quotes the primary sources in their original languages for you. If you see that's still a secondary quoting a primary, okay, that's fine. Go and look up the original primaries. He includes the quotes and gives you the sources, the citations. That's effectively a primary source. You have to contend with that. Don't just point me to some guy who claims to be a liturgical scholar. Engage those primary sources. Why is he wrong? Because he gives you a lot of sources from the first millennium that attest to the fact that this is what was being done with Augustine in his age, and so in his age, and so in his age. So what do you do with that? That's all I was citing Jungmann for, is to show that this is heavily attested to in the first millennium as the predominant mode of reception. Communion in the hand. Let's see, there's some more here. Liturgy is not a toy to play with, not even for Pope. But I never said it was a toy to be played with, right? In fact, I've actually said the exact opposite, quoting from Trent, that acknowledges that the Pope's power here, and by extension an ecumenical council's power here, is pretty vast, but it's not to be arbitrary, right? It's not to be arbitrary. But is it me as a private individual that gets to determine what's an arbitrary use by the Pope? No, because it's that same council that tells you that it's actually the magisterium that gets to determine how prudent this change might be. It's not a plaything, not even for a Pope. I don't know who says that it is. I wasn't aware that there was somebody who took that position. But okay. Let's see. I think there's another one here. Mr. Lofton simply dived deeply into Eastern Orthodox apologetic, so it makes him ultramontanist. I loved that one. That one was fun. I bet there's some Eastern Orthodox watching this right now that are really confused. Wait, what? He doesn't sound Eastern Orthodox to me. I dove into Eastern Orthodox apologetics. That's odd, since I critique Eastern Orthodoxy pretty often. I'm not sure how that substantiates anything that was said up until this point in his favor. I don't know. I wish I could get some clarification on that one, but it makes him an ultramontanist. Wow. No awareness that even the term itself, ultramontanism, can be used in multiple ways. Ultramontanism historically just meant those who effectively opposed conciliarism and looked over the mountains to the Pope. That's a good thing. But often the term now tends to mean somebody who's a hyper-papalist, somebody who thinks that just everything the Pope says is infallible. I don't take that position. I thought I actually make distinctions when it comes to the magisterium. I thought I was the one who was actually talking about non-definitive papal teachings that can be reversed. I thought I was that guy. I mean, I thought that that's what I'm writing my dissertation on. So, not sure how I would be an ultramontanist if I'm talking about non-definitive papal teachings that could be reversed. But okay. Let's see if there's another one here. So our disagreement is clear. I like his work on Eastern Orthodox apologetics, but do not agree with his theological positions. But see, that's what's ironic. My my critique of Eastern Orthodoxy goes hand to hand with my critique of radical traditionalism. They go hand in hand, and vice versa, hand in hand. You can't like my apologetic against Eastern Orthodoxy, but then think that I'm way off with rad trads, and vice versa. They go hand in hand. So I think there's some inconsistency there. I think that was the last screenshot. I got a little bit more time here, but we needed a little levity. We needed that. Some fun here on RNT. Cowabunga trads is greater than radical traditionalists. Enslaved by Truth says, what is a cowabunga trad? Where did this come from? I know Michelangelo from the Ninja Turtles used that term, but I don't really know other than that what the meaning is outside of that context. Send me some chat questions, reason and theology, and see if I can respond to some of them. Let's see how much time. Okay, I got about 20 minutes here. Let's see. Do you or do you not submit to the radical traditionalist alliance between phone and altar? Huh? An alliance between phone and altar? What? I'm lost. Michael lives in Louisiana. There are no mountains there. Yeah. At the most, you'll see a mound. It's true. It's true. It's very sad. That's why anytime I see mountains, I get happy, because I live in flat earth land right now. Let's see. Michael, can you explain what constitutes the ordinary versus extraordinary magisterium? Is the calling of an ecumenical council extraordinary and therefore infallible? Where do we begin? I mean, I've gone over this in more detail elsewhere in the videos in the Magisterium playlist, and so has Dr. Joy. But real quickly, I'll answer. I mean, when we talk about ordinary, are we talking about merely authentic, or are we talking about ordinary and universal magisterium? Be aware that there's a difference there. But when you pit it up against extraordinary magisterium, I understand what you're asking me. But just kind of be aware that that's not a good. Those are not helpful terms, in my opinion. I think they're legitimate, but I think that they tend to be more confusing than helpful in today's context. So I avoid using ordinary versus extraordinary for that reason. I tend to use definitive versus non-definitive, solemn versus non-solemn. I tend to use those distinctions rather than ordinary versus extraordinary, because it doesn't account for the difference between merely authentic and ordinary and universal. Okay. So what constitutes the difference between merely authentic versus maybe something that's an extraordinary magisterium? Well, if you have, let's maybe start with extraordinary. Extraordinary is going to be what the term sounds like, right? Something that's ex cathedra. It doesn't happen often. Something like an ecumenical council. They don't happen often. Those are extraordinary instances of magisterial settings and magisterial teachings. They're extraordinary. They don't happen very often. Then there's what you call ordinary, which is more common, but that can take place in two forms: the ordinary and universal, or merely authentic. Merely authentic is going to be, a pope teaching generally in an encyclical. So it's pretty common, right? The pretty common way of a pope to teach, or a bishop preaching in his own diocese, or writing a pastoral epistle to his diocese, right? That's ordinary. That's common. It's the often frequent way of which the bishops teach. Ordinary and universal is going to be when the bishops are spread throughout the world in union with the pope. They teach something. That is ordinary and universal. Now, that can be broken up into two different instances: ordinary and universal teachings that are reformable, and ordinary and universal teachings that are irreformable. And the latter is going to be when the ordinary and universal magisterium proposes something to be held definitively. Whereas the former is going to be the bishops spread throughout the world teach, they're in agreement with something and they teach it, but they don't teach it as to be held definitively. So that's why I don't like those terms. They don't really get to the heart of all of the distinctions involved. But that's a quick answer to that first part. Is the calling of an ecumenical council extraordinary and therefore infallible? The calling of an ecumenical council? Um, the calling of an ecumenical council doesn't happen often. You could speak of it as extraordinary, but I think what you're getting at is an ecumenical council extraordinary? I think that's what you're asking me. Yes, some are going to categorize an ecumenical council as an extraordinary event, therefore they place it under the category of extraordinary magisterium. I don't like that term because I don't think it's helpful. It doesn't get at enough proper distinctions. You can't just say that an ecumenical council is the extraordinary magisterium. You can't just throw that out there and say that and think that that's sufficient. That's not sufficient. It's an extraordinary event, and it might even have teachings that are infallible. And so you could say it exercises extraordinary magisterium when it teaches solemnly or proposes a profession of faith or something like that. You could say that, but what happens when an ecumenical council teaches something non-infallibly, such as parts of Vatican II or parts of the chapters at Trent? What happens when it teaches non-infallibly, right? It can teach infallibly, most certainly, but it can also propose some things non-infallibly, such as parts of Florence, not all. Notice I said parts. I use the word parts as a qualifier. That means some parts of Florence are definitive. Other parts, they propose non-definitively. What happens? What do you call that? Well, do you just call it ordinary magisterium? Well, that's not a really good term because it's ordinary to describe an extraordinary event. You see how it's not a helpful moniker. So what about some will call the ecumenical council whenever it teaches non-definitively. Some will call that the ordinary and universal magisterium as it teaches non-definitively, not as it teaches definitively. You could maybe say that. I think the better ways to talk about it is, I give the terms that I use. You could speak about the different organs, a pope, an ecumenical council, or even the ordinary and universal magisterium. You can speak of that as an organ. But then, in addition to the organs, speak about definitive, non-definitive, solemn, non-solemn. Use those terms. Those get at all the proper distinctions for each one of those organs. I like speaking of it in that sense, right? So to answer your question, an ecumenical council is in a sense considered extraordinary magisterium in some cases. It's definitely an extraordinary event. Is it infallible? If it teaches something definitively, yes. If it teaches non-definitively, no. All right, great question. Let me look through the chat. Have I read Hart's book, Tradition and Apocalypse? I have not. I'll need to check that out, though. Any thoughts on Patrick Coffin's response in Tim Gordon's show? He didn't offer anything new in that show. So I would say that everything that I said in my video, I would still say still stands as an objection to his position. I didn't hear anything that engaged anything that I said. He probably hasn't watched my response. And if he watched it, he probably felt that he doesn't have to respond to it. But it's true, he doesn't have to respond to me. But that also means that I think that his position hasn't properly engaged at least a sufficient critique of his position. Why do rad-trads believe what demons say about communion on the hand being a demonic invention? Look, because they're going to say, well, the demons say this under compulsion. They're being compelled by the name of Christ to speak the truth, and therefore they have to speak the truth. That's absurd. That is absurd. And I know some exorcists say that that's absurd. Think about that for one moment. They're also being compelled to leave, and yet they don't leave in a lot of these cases. And then sometimes they return, but in a lot of these cases, they're being compelled to leave and they don't leave. So if they're not leaving the body yet, you think that they're somehow compelled to tell the truth, but they're not compelled to leave when it's the same authority behind both? We didn't think that one through very carefully. If you're hearing this, you are the resistance. Enslaved by Truth says, yes, there might be some truth to that. How can someone stay away from traditional circle toxicity? Um, I stay away from certain circles on social media, so that might help you. I'm still unfortunately exposed to it just because people send me messages and stuff. So, let's see. Looking through the chat here. Would I have Patrick Coffin on the show? Sure, he's welcome to come on the show. I think it would be good to have a discussion with him. I'm definitely open to it. I know I'll be charitable. I would hope he would be charitable, but I would definitely be charitable, and he would be welcome to come on and talk about his position. I don't agree with it. I think his position is harmful to souls, but I also think that about some of the other guests I've had on the show that I'm happy to have them on so that we can have a dialogue. But objectively, some of what they say, I think their positions are harmful to souls. I mean, it is what it is. But that doesn't stop us from being able to have these discussions since they're already out there, right? I mean, Coffin and what he's saying is already out there. It's already out in the open, so we might as well address it. If I have the say on whether or not some of this should have been put out there in the open, I would say no, this should not have been put out there in the open. But since it already is, we might as well have a conversation about it. If it were up to me, should the question of whether or not Pope Benedict is still the Pope be put out there in the open for every internet YouTuber to access and be confused by? No, that would be an irresponsible use of social media. That should be more discussed among people who are prepared to have that discussion, not between people on YouTube who might not have all of the what's the word I'm looking for? Equipment to really engage it properly. I do know Reason and Theology did make a quick comment on the show between Gordon and Coffin about one point that was brought up. Yeah, I have a whole lot of points and comments about that discussion. But I did mention that I think there was one part where Gordon said that Universi Dominici Gregis by John Paul II is basically de fide, his words. No. De fide pertains to teachings that are part of the deposit of faith. This, I think it was Apostolic Constitution by John Paul II was disciplinary in matter. It's not part of the deposit of faith, how to determine how a pope is elected and stuff like that. That's not part of the deposit of faith. And it can and has been partially modified by Benedict XVI himself. So it is reformable. So it's not in any way de fide. But yeah, I have a whole lot to say on that discussion. Is Mary's painless childbirth part of the ordinary magisterium or ordinary and universal magisterium? Go and watch the show that we just did on Vatican II ecclesiology and Mary. Check that video out. Let me see what the title is. We did it maybe 3 weeks ago. Let's see. The Virgin Birth and Ecclesiology of Vatican II with Father Brian Graebe, Graebe. Go and watch that show. It's an entire show dedicated to that. And again, I don't like the term ordinary magisterium or ordinary and universal. I don't like that because ordinary and universal magisterium has often been called ordinary magisterium historically. I don't like I don't like those terms. I try to avoid those. Have I seen Salza's new writings on the SSPX being in schism? I've heard about them, but I have not read them. Some would argue that demonic testimony might be unreliable. Yeah, but they're saying, but they're being compelled to tell the truth by the name of Christ. Yeah, they're also being compelled to leave the demoniac, and yet they're not leaving, and you're talking to them at that point. So there's that problem. Number two, you should not be speaking to demons and asking them theological questions anyway. That is to satisfy curiosity, and it's a form of divination. That is incredibly unhelpful. Any exorcist that does that, I think that is wrong. You should not be asking demons their perspective on, theology to try to get at whatever the truth is because you think that they're bound to tell the truth. Why are you talking to demons? You should be casting them out, not asking them theological questions. Stop playing with them and stop entertaining them. That's dangerous. Let's see. Would I invite him or would he need to come to you? I probably won't reach out to him because I don't think he's bothered to watch my video and hasn't said anything about the video. Or so, I mean, if he reaches out to me, sure. If a Eastern Orthodox priest would commune me as a Catholic, should I do it? If there are no Catholic priests available physically or morally to you, yes. Per canon law, yes. If there are none physically or morally available to give you the sacraments, yes, you should. Do I think that the next pope will be better or worse than Francis? As I've said many times, I think he'll be worse. Many trats say that demons fear Latin language. Do you believe this? No. And I know some exorcists say that, and those same exorcists admit that many other exorcists say that that's not the case. And so why is it that some exorcists say that? I think what this is what it is some of these exorcists believe that the use of Latin language is more authoritative, and that probably does impact their personal belief about Latin, probably does impact the quality of the exorcism. Because the outcome of the exorcism is partly dependent on the personal holiness, sanctity, and other factors subjectively about the exorcist. So if the exorcist thinks that this is going to be more powerful, it's probably going to impact the quality of the exorcism. Whereas those exorcists who don't believe that, because it's wrong, probably doesn't impact the quality of their exorcisms, because they recognize it's the authority of Christ and it's the power of Christ and it's the liturgical use of the church that really is going to drive this thing out. Yes, personal sanctity and stuff like that is involved, but not a language, right? But maybe how confident you are in what you're using might impact it. I think that explains for it. Is Latin a sacred language? We could speak about the languages of the cross being a sacred language, but the languages that are mentioned on the cross, we could speak about those being a sacred language. I don't have a problem with that. The problem that I have is to say that because of that, somehow Latin or the Latin use of exorcism is more effective, or they fear Latin more. I think that's where we start to get into positions of absurdity, especially since the fact that one of the ways you know that somebody is possessed is they are able to speak Latin with no training in Latin. Why are they speaking in Latin if they fear it so much? Okay. Again, these are very, very minor opinions from a very minor amount of exorcists. This is not something that is predominant among exorcists. All right, I got to go in a second here, but let's see. Pretty sure the stream yesterday with Gordon and Coffin was indirectly addressing RNT partly. I don't think so, because I got the impression that neither Gordon or Coffin have seen my video. I get the impression neither have seen it, because neither one of them properly engaged what I said about paragraph 76 and 81 of John Paul II's document, for example. Gordon seemed to think that he had a really strong case there. Actually, no. If you look at what I said, he had a very horrible case, and it was incredibly irresponsible what Coffin said about John Paul II's document. So it seemed that he was unaware of it. That, or he wasn't at all impressed by what I said and maybe just dismissed it. That could be the case. But on what basis is what I said dismissible? I thought that I gave a sufficient refutation to Coffin, and Coffin didn't address anything that I said. He just continued to repeat his same position. So again, maybe he watched what I said and dismissed it as insufficient, but I didn't see any interaction with what I said. So to me, I don't think that he really properly engaged anything that I said. I think what it is neither one of them watched the video is effectively what it is. Which I thought was odd, because Coffin at one point said, look, I don't take this personal. I'm fine with dissenting views and people who oppose me, except he took Steve Ray's comments very personal. And that's all Steve Ray did, was opposed his perspective. And he took that very personal on Facebook. So I found that to be somewhat, not in accord with the facts. So I do think that maybe he is maybe taking some of this personally, and maybe that's why he didn't interact with what I said or even watch what I said. I don't know. That is speculation on my part, but it is based on some behavior I've observed from him. Could we say that receiving communion in the hands is beautiful because it's God making himself little and even in a sense helpless in our hands in that sense? But is it helpful in today's context in the Roman Rite? Probably not, because so many people don't believe in the real presence. So when they receive on the hand, that is not helpful, right? And so if we consider that maybe just in a vacuum, we could call that beautiful, but we don't live in a vacuum. We live in the real world, where in the Roman Rite, many people don't believe in the real presence and are abusing the sacrament and are very careless in their mode of reception. For that reason, I don't think communion in the hand is ideal for the Roman Rite. I just don't. I don't prefer communion in the hand or communion on the tongue in general. I prefer the Byzantine way of reception, which the Sixth Council didn't like. So communion on the spoon. The council fathers there would have clearly opposed the Byzantine practice today. So okay, well, I think that's it. So probably end it there. Gordon and Coffin discussion could have been a response to the church militant. Well, it seemed to be, since they were speaking about church militant directly, and yet they never mentioned my video. So I think that they were responding more to church militant, and they said that they were also responding to stuff that Catholic Answers said. That seemed to be what was going on, because they said as much. I don't get the impression that Gordon watched it. Probably not. And I would say the same for Coffin. Probably not. Coffin's probably never heard of me, let alone watch my videos. And I know Gordon's really busy, so he probably didn't watch what I said. And Church Militant and also Catholic Answers are much larger platforms, so you would expect people to watch the larger platforms with the time that they have. All right. Well, let's go ahead and end it there, and maybe we can pick it back up with the discussion of Coffin and his perspective at a later time. Have you received bread on a spoon? Or how do you receive bread on a spoon? My friend, you need to go to a Byzantine liturgy. Okay, go do one. I'm not going to answer that. I'm going to challenge you to go to a Byzantine liturgy. Find out personally. I'm picking on you, but yeah, go and visit a Byzantine liturgy. If you're a Catholic, go and receive Holy Communion, and you'll see. All right, I appreciate y'all watching. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the membership options here on RNT. by joining the channel and getting access to extra perks. You can also check me out, patreon.com/Reason and Theology, if you want to support me. And you'll get access to extra shows, behind the scenes, and all kinds of stuff. So, all right, see y'all later. God bless.
If you're looking to buy or sell a home, office, or any kind of property anywhere in the world, you're going to want to call Real Estate for Life, and they're going to connect you with a Catholic agent. Now, that agent will donate a portion of their commission upon sale, and Real Estate for Life will donate 75% of that gift to a pro-life organization at no cost to you. Call Real Estate for Life at 1-877-LIFE-US1 or text them 248-431-1440. If you care about the pro-life cause, call them now.